The phone went straight to voicemail for the third time in 2 days. And that's when I knew something was wrong. Michael always answered my calls, even when he was busy, even when his perfect wife Sarah rolled her eyes in the background. Always. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. The thing about being a mother is that you develop a sixth sense about your children. Call it intuition, call it maternal instinct, but when something's wrong, you feel it in your bones. And I've been feeling it for weeks. My name is Barbara Wilson, and I'm 67 years old. 3 months ago, I thought my biggest worry was whether to plant roses or lavender in my front garden. It started with the phone calls that came less frequently. Then the missed Sunday dinners became a pattern. Michael had always been reliable about checking in, but after marrying Sarah Collins in that whirlwind April wedding, everything changed. Mom, Sarah thinks we need to establish better boundaries, he'd explained during our last conversation 2 weeks ago. His voice sounded different somehow, hollow, like he was reading from a script. We're trying to build our own family traditions, boundaries. That's what she called cutting me out of their lives bit by bit. I picked up my phone again and dialed Michael's work number. The receptionist's cheerful voice made my heart skip. Wilson Construction. This is Jenny. Hi, this is Barbara Wilson, Michael's mother. Is he available? A pause. Oh, Mrs. Wilson. I'm sorry, but Michael hasn't been in for over a week. We thought he was taking vacation time. The room started spinning. Michael never took unplanned vacation. He was methodical, organized, just like his father had been. Did he call in, leave any message? No, ma'am. Actually, we've been trying to reach him too. We have that Henderson project deadline coming up. I thanked Jenny and hung up, my hands trembling. A week? Michael had been missing from work for a week, and I was just finding out now. What kind of mother doesn't know when her child disappears? The answer was simple. The kind whose son married a woman who made isolation her specialty. Sarah Collins had seemed perfect when Michael first brought her home in January. Beautiful, articulate, charming, she asked all the right questions about my garden, complimented my cooking, and gazed at Michael like he hung the moon. Too perfect, my neighbor Dorothy had whispered after meeting her at Michael's birthday party. That girl's performing, not living. But Michael was so happy, so completely smitten that I'd pushed my doubts aside. When they announced their engagement after just 2 months of dating, I'd bitten my tongue. When Sarah insisted on a small, intimate wedding with just immediate family, I'd smiled and agreed. The wedding photo showed a radiant bride and a grinning groom, but I remembered how Sarah's eyes had scanned the room during the ceremony, calculating, measuring like she was already planning the next move. Now sitting in my empty house with unanswered calls and growing dread, I realized Dorothy had been right. Sarah had been performing. The question was, what was the final act? The call came at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, jolting me from the first decent sleep I'd had in days. Sarah's name lit up my phone screen, and my heart hammered against my ribs. Barbara, it's Sarah. Her voice was flat, emotionless. No tears, no breaking, just cold efficiency. Sarah, thank God. I've been trying to reach you both for days. Where's Michael? Silence stretched between us like a chasm. When she finally spoke, her words hit me like physical blows. Michael's dead, Barbara. Car accident on Highway 50 3 days ago. The phone slipped from my hand and clattered onto the kitchen floor. Dead. My dead. I scrambled to pick up the phone, my vision blurring. Sarah, I'm so sorry. Oh God. When is the funeral? I need to book a flight to Nevada immediately. The funeral was yesterday. Her voice cut through my panic like ice. Close family only. It was what Michael wanted. Yesterday. The funeral was yesterday and she was just telling me now. My son was buried and I wasn't there. What do you mean close family? I'm his mother. Barbara, I understand you're upset, but you need to respect our privacy during this difficult time. Michael and I discussed this situation before the accident. He wanted things kept small. Discussed this situation. She was talking about my son's death like it was a business arrangement. And Michael would never ever have wanted me excluded from his funeral. Never. Sarah, please. I need to understand what happened. How did he die? Was he alone? Was he? I have to go. Barbara, I have arrangements to make. I'll call you when I'm ready to talk. The line went dead. I sat on my kitchen floor, still holding the phone, trying to process what had just happened. My son was dead and buried, and his wife had excluded me from saying goodbye. The woman who'd smiled so sweetly at our Sunday dinners had just delivered the worst news of my life with all the warmth of a telemarketer. Something was wrong. Everything about this was wrong. I thought back to the last time I'd spoken to Michael 2 weeks ago. He'd sounded strange, distant, but not like someone planning his own funeral arrangements. And the Michael I'd raised would never have agreed to exclude me from anything, let alone his final goodbye. Over the next few days I called Sarah repeatedly. Every call went straight to voicemail. I tried reaching out to Michael's friends, but none of them had heard about the accident. His coworkers were equally shocked when I broke the news. "Mrs. Wilson, are you sure?" asked Tom Henderson, Michael's business partner. "We have 3 active projects." Michael wouldn't just disappear without telling me. That's when I started making the calls that would change everything. I called the Nevada State Police, Clark County Sheriff's Department, and finally the coroner's office in Las Vegas. "Ma'am, I need a case number or approximate date of death to search our records," the clerk explained patiently. "June 3, 2024, Highway 50. Michael Wilson, 29 years old." I waited while she searched, my heart pounding. Please let there be a mistake. Please let Michael be alive somewhere, angry at me for checking up on him. "Ma'am, I'm not finding any traffic fatalities by that name on that date. Are you sure about the spelling?" The room went cold. No accident, no death certificate, no body. Either Sarah Collins was lying about how my son died or she was lying about him being dead at all. I booked a flight to Las Vegas that same afternoon. If Sarah thought she could keep me in the dark about my son's death, she was about to learn exactly what Barbara Wilson was capable of when someone threatened her family. The plane ride gave me 3 hours to think, and by the time we landed I had a plan. First, I'd find Michael and Sarah's address. Then I'd get answers whether Sarah wanted to provide them or not. The rental car clerk was a chatty young man named Kevin, who seemed genuinely sympathetic when I explained I was visiting for a family emergency. "Sorry for your loss, ma'am. Vegas can be overwhelming when you're dealing with grief. You need any recommendations for florists? Good places to grab comfort food?" I thanked him and drove to the address I'd found online. My hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. Michael and Sarah lived in an upscale neighborhood called Summerland. All Mediterranean-style houses with perfect lawns and 3-car garages. Their house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, Sarah's white BMW gleaming in the driveway. At least someone was home. I parked across the street and sat for a moment, gathering courage. Through the large front windows I could see movement inside. Someone was home. Someone was alive, and I was about to find out who. The doorbell chimed pleasantly when I pressed it. Footsteps approached, and then Sarah opened the door wearing a black sundress and dark sunglasses. No tears, no red eyes, no signs of grief. She looked like she was dressed for a lunch date, not mourning her husband, Barbara. Her voice held no surprise, no welcome. "What are you doing here?" "I came to see where my son lived, where he died, since you didn't think I deserved to attend his funeral." Sarah glanced over my shoulder, checking to see if anyone was watching. "You can't just show up here uninvited." "I'm still processing my grief." "Your grief? You sound about as grieved as someone discussing the weather." "Where is Michael buried?" A flicker of something crossed her face before the mask slipped back into place. "Mountain View Cemetery." "Now, if you'll excuse me, I'd like to see his room, his belongings. I'd like to understand what happened to my son." "That's not possible. I've already donated most of his things. It's too painful to keep reminders around." Donated his things. Michael had been dead for less than a week, and she'd already erased every trace of him. What widow donates her husband's belongings before the funeral flowers have wilted? "Sarah, I need you to tell me exactly what happened. How did Michael die? What was he doing on Highway 50? Why wasn't I notified immediately?" She stepped back slightly, and I caught a glimpse of the living room behind her. The space was immaculate. Not a single item out of place. No flowers from the funeral. No sympathy cards. No signs that anyone had died here recently. "Barbara, I understand you're struggling with acceptance. But Michael is gone. Continuing to question everything isn't going to bring him back. Show me the death certificate." The words hung between us like a challenge. Sarah's composure wavered for just a moment, but it was enough. "I don't have to show you anything. You're not next of kin." "Not next of kin. I'd been Michael's emergency contact for 29 years. His insurance beneficiary, his medical proxy, everything. Unless someone had changed all of that very recently. When did Michael change his emergency contacts, Sarah? Her jaw tightened. After we got married. It's what married couples do. In 4 months. He changed everything in 4 months. But I already knew the answer. She'd isolated him so completely that even in death I'd been erased from his life. Mountain View Cemetery sprawled across rolling hills dotted with palm trees and elaborate monuments. I drove through the gates with the groundskeeper directions clutched in my hand, looking for Section G, Plot 247. Fresh burial, ma'am, the elderly groundskeeper had said when I'd asked about Michael Wilson. Just last week, real nice spot under the olive trees. But when I found Section G, Plot 247 was empty. Just grass and a small temporary marker that looked like it had been placed there yesterday. No headstone, no flowers, no signs that a funeral had taken place. I knelt beside the marker, reading Michael's name and dates in cheap plastic lettering. June 3, 2024. The date Sarah had given me. But something felt wrong. The grass wasn't disturbed. There was no indication that earth had been dug up and replaced recently. Excuse me, I called to a groundskeeper trimming nearby hedges. This grave? When was the burial? He walked over, studying the marker. That's odd. I don't remember any burial in this section last week. Let me check with the office. 20 minutes later, I sat in the cemetery office across from a frustrated director named Mrs. Patterson. Mrs. Wilson, I'm very sorry for the confusion. We have a payment for plot 247 in your son's name, but no burial has taken place. The plot was purchased last Tuesday, the same day you're saying the funeral occurred. Purchased the day of the supposed funeral. My head was spinning. Is it possible the body was buried somewhere else? Mrs. Patterson consulted her computer again. I've checked all our records. No. Michael Wilson has been interred at Mountain View Cemetery. The plot was purchased as a pre-need arrangement. Pre-need, planning for a death that hadn't happened yet. I drove back to Sarah's house with my mind racing. No death certificate, no accident report, no actual burial. Either Michael was still alive somewhere, or Sarah had killed him and disposed of his body somewhere else. This time I didn't bother with the front door. I walked around to the backyard, peering through windows looking for any sign of my son. The house appeared staged like a model home. No personal items, no photographs, no evidence that a young couple had been building a life together. But in the master bedroom window, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A suitcase packed and sitting by the door. Sarah wasn't grieving. She was getting ready to leave. I was pulling out my phone to call the police when a neighbor appeared at the fence. Excuse me, are you looking for someone? The woman was maybe 60 with kind eyes and curious expression. I decided to take a chance. I'm Barbara Wilson, Michael's mother. I'm trying to understand what happened to my son. Her face immediately changed. Oh honey, you mean the young man who lived here? I'm so sorry. Such a tragedy. You saw the accident? She looked confused. Accident? No dear. I saw the ambulance last Wednesday morning around 10 a.m. They brought him out on a stretcher, but he was covered up. Sarah was crying. Said he'd had some kind of medical emergency. Wednesday morning, 3 days before Sarah claimed he died in a car accident on Highway 50. Did you see what kind of medical emergency? No, but it was strange. Usually, when someone has a heart attack or stroke, you see the paramedics working on them trying to revive them. This was different. They just loaded him up and left. I thanked her and walked back to my car, my hands shaking. Michael hadn't died in a car accident. He died at home, and Sarah had waited 3 days to report it. 3 days to get her story straight, to purchase a cemetery plot, to plan her next move. Whatever had happened to my son, Sarah knew exactly how he died, and she was planning to disappear before anyone else started asking questions. I spent that night in a hotel room making phone calls and taking notes. If Sarah thought she could murder my son and walk away, she was about to discover that his mother had no intention of letting that happen. First, I called every hospital in Las Vegas, asking about any patients named Michael Wilson admitted or treated in the past 2 weeks. Nothing. No emergency room visits, no medical records, no record that he'd ever existed. Then I called the police department's non-emergency line and explained my concerns to a detective named Rodriguez. Ma'am, I understand your frustration, But without a body or evidence of foul play, there's not much we can do. Maybe your son and his wife are having marital problems. Sometimes people disappear when they need space. Detective, there's no death certificate, no accident report, and the cemetery has no record of a burial. Either my son is alive and being held against his will, or someone killed him and is covering it up. I could hear the skepticism in his voice. Have you considered that maybe your daughter-in-law is protecting your son's privacy? Sometimes families prefer to handle things quietly. After hanging up in frustration, I decided to take matters into my own hands. If the police wouldn't listen, I'd have to build a case myself. I drove back to Sarah's neighborhood and parked where I could watch the house. My plan was simple. Follow her when she left, see where she went, document everything. If she was planning to disappear, I wanted to know when and where. Around noon, Sarah emerged from the house carrying the suitcase I'd seen in the bedroom window. She loaded it into her BMW and drove away, checking her mirrors constantly like someone who knew she was being watched. I followed at a distance, my heart pounding with nerves and adrenaline. Sarah drove to a storage facility called Secure Space on the outskirts of town. She used a key card to enter the facility and disappeared inside Unit 247, the same number as Michael's cemetery plot. That couldn't be a coincidence. I parked across the street and waited. 30 minutes later, Sarah emerged empty-handed and drove to a bank. Another 30 minutes and she was back in her car heading toward the airport, McCarran International Airport, Terminal 1. I followed her into the terminal, keeping my distance as she checked in at the United Airlines counter. When she headed toward security, I approached the ticket agent. "Excuse me, I think that woman who just checked in dropped something." I gestured towards Sarah, who was now in the security line. "Could you tell me what flight she's on so I can catch her?" The young agent consulted her computer. "That passenger is on Flight 847 to Portland, Oregon, departing at 4:15 p.m. Portland, my city." Sarah was heading to my hometown and I had no idea why, but I wasn't going to let her get there first. I bought a ticket on the same flight and called Detective Rodriguez from the gate. "Detective, I need you to check on the storage unit at Secure Space, Unit 247. I believe there's evidence related to my son's disappearance." "Ma'am, I can't just search a storage unit based on your suspicions. Then get a warrant. I'm telling you, Sarah Collins killed my son and she's about to disappear. If you don't stop her now, you'll never find her." As I boarded the plane behind Sarah, keeping my head down and hoping she wouldn't recognize me, I realized that my quiet life as a retired librarian was over. I was about to become the kind of woman who hunted down her son's killer. Sarah Collins wasn't on the Portland flight. I'd bought a ticket, waited at the gate, watched every passenger board, but somehow she'd vanished between the security checkpoint and the departure gate. Either she'd spotted me following her, or she'd never intended to get on that plane at all. I was sitting in the Portland airport at 11 p.m., exhausted and defeated when my phone rang. "Detective Rodriguez. Mrs. Wilson, we got that warrant for the storage unit. You need to get back to Las Vegas immediately." "What did you find?" "Just get back here tonight." The next flight to Vegas wasn't until 6 a.m., giving me 5 hours to pace my empty house and imagine every horrible possibility. By the time I landed in Nevada, I'd convinced myself that they'd found Michael's body in that storage unit. Detective Rodriguez met me at the police station, his expression grim. "Mrs. Wilson, I owe you an apology. We found some very disturbing evidence in Unit 247. He led me to a conference room where boxes of evidence sat on a long table. Photographs, documents, personal items that made my blood run cold. "These are Michael's belongings," I whispered, recognizing his watch, his wallet, his college ring. "Yes, but that's not the most concerning discovery. Look at this." Rodriguez showed me a manila folder filled with documents. Marriage certificates, death certificates, life insurance policies, all in different names, all for different men, but all with the same woman listed as the surviving spouse. Sarah Collins, Sarah Fletcher, Sarah Kim, Sarah Morrison. We've identified at least 4 previous marriages in the past 8 years. 3 of the husbands died under suspicious circumstances, all within 6 months of the wedding. The 4th husband, James Fletcher, survived, but barely. He's in protective custody in Oregon. For marriages, 3 dead husbands. My son was supposed to be number 4. "Detective, where is Michael? Is he alive?" Rodriguez's expression softened. Mrs. Wilson, we found Michael's body this morning. He was buried in the desert outside Henderson. The coroner estimates he's been dead for about 10 days. 10 days. Michael had been dead for 10 days while I was calling his phone, worrying about missed dinners, making plans to visit. How did he die? Poisoning. Ricin specifically. It's a toxin derived from castor beans. Very difficult to detect. Looks like natural causes unless you know what to look for. I sank into the conference room chair, the weight of everything finally hitting me. My son was dead and was murdered by the woman he'd loved and trusted. Poisoned slowly while I was hundreds of miles away, oblivious to his suffering. We have APB out on Sarah Collins, Rodriguez continued. Real name Margaret Winters. She's done this before, and she's very good at disappearing. But Mrs. Wilson, without your persistence, we never would have discovered this pattern. You saved other potential victims. But I hadn't saved Michael. I'd failed my son when he needed me most. Detective, how long had she been poisoning him? Based on the medical evidence and the neighbor's testimony about the ambulance, probably several weeks. Ricin poisoning is slow, gradual. The victim gets sicker and sicker, but it looks like natural illness until the final stages. The phone calls that came less frequently, the missed dinners, Michael's voice sounding strange and distant during our last conversation. He hadn't been pulling away from me. He'd been dying, probably too sick to understand what was happening to him. Sarah had been killing my son for weeks, and I thought he was just being distant. Rodriguez placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. Mrs. Wilson, your son fought this. He tried to call you several times in the days before he died. We found his phone records. I think he knew something was wrong, but he was too sick to get help. Michael had tried to call me in his final days when he was suffering and afraid. He'd reached out to his mother, but I hadn't been there to answer. As I sat in that conference room, surrounded by evidence of my son's murder, I made a promise to Michael's memory. Margaret Winters might have escaped for now, but I would make sure she never killed another person's child. The hunt for my son's killer was just beginning. 3 weeks after Michael's funeral, I was sitting in a coffee shop in downtown Portland when I spotted her. Margaret Winters, formerly Sarah Collins, formerly 3 other dead men's wives, was standing in line at Pioneer Courthouse Square, looking like she'd never killed anyone in her life. For a moment I thought I was hallucinating. Grief does strange things to your mind, and I'd been seeing Michael's face in crowds for weeks. But this was different. This was real. She'd changed her hair from blonde to auburn and wore glasses now, but I'd spent 4 months studying that face across my dinner table. I knew the way she tilted her head when she was listening, the practiced smile that never reached her eyes, the careful way she moved through the world like someone always calculating the next move. My hand started shaking as I fumbled for my phone. Detective Rodriguez had given me his direct number and made me promise to call if I ever saw anything suspicious. Well, spotting my son's killer buying coffee 2 miles from my house definitely qualified as suspicious. Rodriguez, detective, it's Barbara Wilson. I found her. Margaret Winters is in Portland at Pioneer Square. Mrs. Wilson, are you absolutely certain? We've had dozens of false sightings. I'm certain. Same walk, same mannerisms. She's changed her appearance, but it's definitely her. Don't approach her. Don't let her see you. I'm contacting Portland PD immediately. But as I watched through the coffee shop window, Margaret was already moving. She walked quickly through the square, checking over her shoulder every few steps. Someone who'd spent months evading capture developed certain habits. And right now, those habits were telling her to run. I threw $5 on the table and followed at a distance, keeping my phone line open with Rodriguez. Margaret walked 3 blocks to a parking garage and got into a silver Honda Civic with Washington plates. Another stolen identity. Another stolen life. She's driving a silver Honda Washington license plate. Charlie Delta 7492. I reported as I hurried to my own car. Mrs. Wilson, do not follow her. Wait for backup. But Margaret was already pulling out of the garage, and I knew if I lost her now, she'd disappear again. Maybe forever. Maybe to kill another innocent man who thought he'd found love. I followed the Honda through Portland's afternoon traffic, staying back far enough to avoid detection, but close enough to keep her in sight. Margaret drove like someone who knew the city, taking side streets and cutting through neighborhoods with the confidence of someone who'd been planning escape routes. After 20 minutes, she pulled into the parking lot of a modest apartment complex in southeast Portland. I parked across the street and watched as she climbed to the second floor and disappeared into Unit 237. Another address, another temporary home. How many apartments had she rented under false names? How many lives had she built and discarded when they no longer served her purpose? I called Rodriguez back with the address and settled in to wait. Margaret might think she was safe, but she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd come to my city where I knew every street, every shortcut, every place someone might hide. After an hour, 3 Portland police cars arrived quietly. No sirens or flashing lights. I watched from my car as they surrounded the building and positioned officers at all exits. Detective Thompson from Portland PD approached my car. "Mrs. Wilson, I'm coordinating with Detective Rodriguez in Las Vegas. We're going to need you to make a positive identification when we bring her out." "She's not going to come quietly," I said. "Margaret Winters has killed at least 3 men and tried to kill a 4th. She'll have an escape plan." Thompson nodded. "We're prepared for that possibility. Has she seen you today?" "I don't think so. But she's paranoid. Constantly watching for threats. It's how she stayed ahead of law enforcement for 8 years. 8 years. We thought this pattern started 5 years ago. Check deeper. I've been researching her background. There are probably victims you haven't found yet." As we spoke, I saw movement in Margaret's second-floor window. She was packing again, throwing items into a suitcase with the efficiency of someone who'd done this many times before. "Detective, she's getting ready to run." Now Thompson radioed his team, and within minutes, officers were moving toward the building. But Margaret was already ahead of them. A fire escape ladder dropped down the back of the building, and I caught a glimpse of auburn hair as she climbed down with a single bag. "Back exit," I shouted, pointing toward the alley. But Margaret had planned well. A motorcycle was waiting in the alley, keys in the ignition. She threw her leg over the bike and kicked it to life just as the first officer rounded the corner. The motorcycle roared away, weaving between parked cars and disappearing into traffic. Margaret Winters had escaped again, but this time I'd seen her method. She was methodical, prepared, always one step ahead because she planned for every contingency. But she'd also revealed something important. She was still in Portland, which meant she wasn't finished here yet. There was something keeping her in the city, something worth the risk of staying so close to Michael's family. That something, I realized with growing dread, might be me. The answer came at 3 a.m. when my house alarm started screaming. I'd been lying awake since the failed arrest, my mind racing with questions about why Margaret would risk staying in Portland. Now, as I reached for the phone to call 911, I understood she wasn't running anymore. She was hunting. The alarm system showed a breach in the kitchen door, but by the time the police arrived, Margaret was gone. She'd left something behind, though, sitting on my kitchen table like a calling card. Michael's college ring. The same ring I'd seen in the evidence boxes at the Las Vegas police station. The ring that had been buried with my son just 3 weeks ago. She dug up his grave. I whispered to Officer Martinez as he photographed the scene. She went back to Nevada and dug up my son's grave. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Margaret hadn't just killed Michael. She desecrated his final resting place to send me a message. This wasn't random violence or crime of opportunity. This was personal. Martinez looked grim as he bagged the ring as evidence. "Mrs. Wilson, you can't stay here tonight. Do you have somewhere safe you can go?" I almost laughed. Safe? My son's killer had just broken into my house to leave me a trophy from his corpse. Nowhere was safe anymore. But I had an idea. My neighbor, Dorothy, had been Michael's honorary grandmother since he was 5 years old. Her house shared a backyard fence with mine. And more importantly, Dorothy was a retired Army nurse who kept a shotgun by her front door and wasn't afraid to use it. "Dorothy, it's Barbara. I need to ask you an enormous favor." 2 hours later, I was sitting in Dorothy's kitchen while she made tea and tried to process everything I'd told her about Michael's murder. "That woman has some nerve," Dorothy said, her voice sharp with anger. "Coming into our neighborhood, threatening you in your own home. She picked the wrong mother to mess with." Dorothy was 73 years old, had survived 3 tours as a combat nurse, and had raised 4 children as a single mother after her husband died young. If anyone could help me face Margaret Winters, it was Dorothy Hanson. "What do you need from me?" she asked. "I need you to help me catch her. The police are good, but they're thinking like law enforcement. Margaret isn't a typical criminal. She's a predator who's been perfecting her methods for years. We need to think like she thinks." Dorothy poured our tea and sat across from me. "Tell me about her pattern. How does she choose her victims?" I pulled out the folder of research I'd compiled over the past 3 weeks. Older men, financially stable, recently divorced or widowed, men who are vulnerable to the attention of a beautiful younger woman. She studies them first, learns their routines, their weaknesses, and then she becomes exactly what they need. The grieving widower gets a sympathetic companion. The divorced businessman gets an admiring girlfriend who thinks he's brilliant. She mirrors their desires until they're completely dependent on her. Dorothy studied the photographs of Margaret's previous victims. These men all look similar. Same age range, same social class. She has a type. That's what I've been thinking about. Margaret came to Portland for a reason. She's not just hiding here. She's hunting. There's another victim somewhere in this city. Someone who fits her pattern. We spent the next hour going through local obituaries, divorce records, and social media profiles. Portland was a big city, but Margaret's victim profile was specific enough to narrow the search. What about him? Dorothy pointed to a newspaper article about a local business owner named Robert Chen, 58, whose wife had died of cancer 6 months ago. The article mentioned his successful import business and his struggle with grief. "Look at this," I said, finding Robert's social media profile. He's been posting about loneliness, about how hard it is to start over, and he's been getting sympathetic comments from someone named Rebecca Fletcher. Rebecca Fletcher. Another false identity. Another carefully constructed persona designed to lure in a grieving man. "Dorothy, I think we found him, and I think we just figured out how to catch Margaret Winters." The plan was simple. I would warn Robert Chun about the woman who was probably already worming her way into his life. But instead of scaring her away, we'd use his cooperation to set a trap. Margaret had made this personal when she broke into my house. Now it was time to turn the tables. "Barbara," Dorothy said as we finalized our plan, "you realize this is dangerous. If Margaret figures out what we're doing, then she'll try to kill me too. But Dorothy, I can't live the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, wondering when she'll strike again. And I can't let her destroy another family the way she destroyed mine." Dorothy smiled grimly. "Good, because I wasn't going to let you do this alone anyway." Robert Chun was exactly the kind of man Margaret Winters preyed upon. Successful, lonely, and desperate to believe that love could heal his broken heart. When Dorothy and I approached him at his import business the next morning, he initially thought we were customers. But when I explained who I was and why we'd come, his face went pale. "You're telling me that Rebecca is a murderer? That's impossible. She's been helping me through the worst time of my life." I showed him the photographs of Margaret's previous victims, the timeline of her marriages and murders, the evidence that had been building for 8 years. "Mr. Chun, how long have you known Rebecca?" 6 weeks. We met at a grief support group. She lost her husband in a car accident just like my wife died of cancer. We understood each other's pain. Classic Margaret. Always the perfect victim herself. Always the wounded woman who needed protection and comfort. "Has she moved into your house yet?" Robert shifted uncomfortably. "She's been staying over a few nights a week. Her apartment has problems with the plumbing." "Has she suggested marriage? Talked about combining your lives, your finances?" "Well, yes, but that's natural when 2 people care about each other." Dorothy leaned forward. "Mr. Chan, this woman has killed at least 3 husbands for their life insurance money. You're not falling in love. You're being set up for murder." The color drained from his face. "What do you want from me?" "We want you to help us catch her," I said. "Continue the relationship, but be careful about what you eat or drink. Wear a wire when you're with her. Help us gather evidence." "You want me to use myself as bait? This woman is a killer." "Mr. Chun," Dorothy said gently, "if you don't help us stop her, she'll kill you anyway. At least this way you have a chance." It took 3 hours of discussion, but eventually Robert agreed to cooperate. Detective Thompson provided the recording equipment and coaching on how to guide conversations toward topics that might incriminate Margaret. The plan was to have Robert propose marriage and suggest a quick wedding, something that would force Margaret to accelerate her timeline. If she was planning to kill him, the prospect of immediate access to his assets would make her sloppy. Over the next week, I watched from a surveillance van as Robert played his part perfectly. He talked about updating his will, about how Rebecca had given his life new meaning, about wanting to start fresh with someone who understood loss. Margaret, playing Rebecca Fletcher, responded exactly as predicted. She suggested a small ceremony, just the two of them, followed by a honeymoon where they could start their new life together. "She's moving fast," Detective Thompson observed as we listened to their dinner conversation. "Usually, she waits at least 3 months before suggesting marriage." "Something's got her spooked," I said. "Maybe the failed arrest, maybe the break-in at my house. She's feeling pressure." On Thursday evening, the pressure became clear. Robert had left his microphone on when he went to the bathroom, and we heard Margaret making a phone call. "I need to move the timeline up," she said to whoever was on the other end. "There's too much heat here. I'll finish this job and disappear permanently." Finish this job. She was planning to kill Robert Chin immediately. "We need to arrest her now," Thompson said, reaching for his radio. "Wait," I said. "She's too smart to have evidence lying around. We need her to actually attempt the murder, or she'll walk away on insufficient evidence. Mrs. Wilson, we can't let her poison Mr. Chun." "We won't, but we need to catch her in the act or she'll just disappear and find another victim in another city." That night, Robert invited Margaret for dinner at his house. The place was surrounded by undercover officers, and Robert wore both a wire and a small camera. Every piece of food and drink was monitored with Dorothy, and a police paramedic standing by with antidotes for various poisons. Margaret arrived with a bottle of wine and a casserole she'd made specially for Robert. Through the surveillance feed, I watched her serve him the casserole and pour the wine, encouraging him to eat while barely touching her own plate. "Classic behavior," the paramedic whispered. "She's dosed the food with something." We waited until Margaret excused herself to the bathroom, then moved in. Officers entered through the back door while Robert quickly dumped his wine into a hidden container and switched his plate with a clean one Dorothy had prepared. When Margaret returned, she seemed nervous but continued the charade. She talked about their future together, about the honeymoon they planned, about how much she loved him. 20 minutes later, she started checking her watch. "Robert, you seem tired. Maybe you should lie down." "I do feel a bit dizzy," Robert said, following the script we'd rehearsed. "But I'm sure it's just excitement about our wedding tomorrow." Margaret's eyes lit up. "Of course. Here, let me help you to the bedroom." As she helped Robert to his feet, Detective Thompson's voice came through our earpieces. "Move in now." The front door burst open as officers swarmed the house. Margaret's carefully constructed persona shattered instantly, her face transforming from loving girlfriend to cold-blooded killer in a matter of seconds. "You set me up," she snarled at Robert, all pretense gone. "Mrs. Margaret Winters," Detective Thompson said, pulling out his handcuffs. "You're under arrest for the murder of Michael Wilson and the attempted murder of Robert Chen." As they led her away, Margaret caught sight of me standing by the surveillance van. For a moment our eyes met, and I saw something I'd never seen before in her carefully controlled expression: fear. The trial of Margaret Winters lasted 6 weeks and revealed a pattern of murder that stretched back 12 years, not 8. She'd been killing lonely men since she was 19 years old, perfecting her methods with each victim. I attended every day of testimony, sitting in the front row where Margaret couldn't avoid seeing me. It seemed like a small thing, but I wanted her to know that Michael's mother was watching, that someone was there to speak for all the men she'd killed. The prosecution built their case methodically. DNA evidence from the storage unit. Testimony from James Fletcher, the husband who'd survived. Financial records showing the pattern of quick marriages and large insurance payouts. The evidence was overwhelming, but it was Robert Chin's testimony that sealed her fate. "She told me she loved me," he said from the witness stand, his voice steady despite the emotional weight of his words. "She said we would grow old together, that she would take care of me forever. All the while, she was planning my death." Margaret's defense attorney tried to paint her as a victim herself, a woman who'd suffered childhood trauma and made poor choices. But the jury wasn't buying it. When you've killed at least 6 people over 12 years, claiming victimhood becomes a hard sell. The toxicology report on the casserole she prepared for Robert showed lethal levels of ricin, the same poison that had killed Michael. She'd been planning to watch Robert die slowly, probably while playing the devoted girlfriend, rushing him to the hospital, crying for the cameras. On the day of sentencing, I was given the opportunity to deliver a victim impact statement. I'd been preparing what to say for weeks, but when I stood up in that courtroom and looked at Margaret Winters, only one thing mattered. Your Honor, Margaret Winters didn't just kill my son. She killed the future we would have shared together. The grandchildren I'll never hold. The holidays we'll never celebrate. The phone calls that will never come. She killed Michael slowly over weeks while he trusted her completely. That's not just murder. That's torture. I turned to face Margaret directly. You chose to become a predator. You chose to hunt good men who were only guilty of being lonely. You chose to destroy families for money. And you chose to come after me when I threatened to expose you. Every choice you made was deliberate, calculated, and evil. Margaret stared back at me, her expression unreadable. Even facing life in prison, she showed no remorse, no recognition that her victims were human beings with families who loved them. But here's what you didn't count on, I continued. You didn't count on a mother who would never stop fighting for her son. You underestimated what happens when you threaten someone's family. And you thought you could intimidate me into giving up and going away. I smiled at her then, and for the first time I saw her composure crack slightly. You were wrong about all of it. The judge sentenced Margaret Winters to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As they led her away in shackles, she tried one last manipulation, calling out to me. Mrs. Wilson, I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me. Michael talked about you often. He really loved you. I didn't respond. Margaret Winters had spent 12 years learning how to manipulate people's emotions, how to find their vulnerabilities and exploit them. She thought invoking Michael's memory would hurt me, would give her some kind of final victory. But she was wrong about that too. Michael did love me, and that love had given me the strength to hunt down his killer and make sure she could never hurt anyone else. After the trial, Detective Rodriguez found me in the courthouse parking lot. Mrs. Wilson, I wanted to thank you personally. Without your persistence, Margaret Winters would still be out there killing people. You saved lives. I just did what any mother would do, I said. No, he replied. Most people would have accepted the official story and moved on. You fought when everyone told you to give up. That takes a special kind of courage. Maybe he was right. Maybe hunting down your son's killer takes a special kind of courage. Or maybe it just takes being a mother who refuses to let evil win. Either way, Margaret Winters would spend the rest of her life in a cage, and Michael could finally rest in peace. 6 months after Margaret's sentencing, I received an unexpected phone call that would change everything one final time. Mrs. Wilson, this is Detective Sarah Martinez with the Portland Cold Case Unit. We've been reviewing some old files, and your son's case has opened doors to investigations we've been stuck on for years. I was in my garden planting roses in the spot where Michael had built me a trellis when he was 16. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was finally able to plant those roses I'd been debating about a year ago, back when my biggest worry was garden design. What kind of investigations, Detective? We've connected Margaret Winters to at least 4 additional murders across 3 states. Men who died under suspicious circumstances between 2010 and 2015 before she started using the Collins identity. Your investigation gave us the pattern we needed to link the cases. For more families who would finally have answers. For more men whose deaths would no longer be mysteries. There's something else. Detective Martinez continued. We found evidence that Margaret had a partner. Someone who helped her identify targets and create false identities. Someone who's still out there. Partner. Margaret hadn't been working alone. Detective, what do you need from me? Actually, Mrs. Wilson, we were hoping you might consider joining our cold case task force as a consultant. Your insights into Margaret's behavior patterns have been invaluable, and frankly, you think like a predator better than most trained investigators. I almost laughed. A year ago, I was a retired librarian whose biggest challenge was dealing with overdue book fines. Now the police were asking me to help hunt serial killers. What would that involve? Reviewing cold cases, looking for patterns that might indicate Margaret-style murders, helping us understand how these predators choose and groom their victims. You've developed an expertise that we need. I looked around my garden at the house where I'd raised Michael, at the life I'd built and lost and was slowly rebuilding. For months I'd been drifting, unsure what to do with the rest of my years. Michael was gone. Margaret was in prison. And I was 67 years old with no clear purpose. But this felt right. Using what I'd learned to help other families, to prevent other mothers from losing their children to predators like Margaret Winters. Detective, when do I start? 3 weeks later, I was sitting in the Portland Police Bureau's cold case conference room, surrounded by files and evidence boards and photographs of victims who deserve justice. My official title was victim advocate and behavioral consultant. But really, I was doing what I'd always done best, paying attention to details that others missed. The first case they gave me was a 2013 death in Salem. David Morrison, 54, had died of apparent food poisoning 2 months after marrying a woman named Patricia Williams. The death had been ruled accidental, but something about the timeline bothered the original investigators. I studied Patricia Williams's background and found the same pattern. Grieving widower, whirlwind romance, quick marriage, suspicious death. But this time I had the advantage of knowing what to look for. She's changed her methods, I told the task force. Margaret used poison because it was hard to detect and looked like natural causes. Patricia Williams used food poisoning because it's even more common and even less suspicious. We reopened David Morrison's case and found trace evidence of salmonella that had been deliberately cultivated and concentrated. Patricia Williams had murdered her husband with contaminated food, making it look like a tragic accident. The best part, Patricia Williams was still alive, still hunting, still using the same identity she'd used to kill David Morrison. We found her in Spokane, Washington, 6 weeks into a relationship with a recently divorced businessman named Frank Torres. This time we moved fast. No surveillance, no complicated sting operation. We arrested Patricia Williams before she could poison Frank Torres. And when we searched her apartment, we found evidence linking her to 3 other suspicious deaths. Frank Torres sent me a thank you card after the arrest. "You saved my life," he wrote. I was completely fooled by her. "Thank you for seeing what I couldn't see." That's when I finally understood what I was meant to do with the rest of my life. Michael's death had been senseless, tragic, devastating. But if I could use what I'd learned from losing him to save other people's children, then maybe some good could come from all the pain. Over the next year, our task force solved 8 cold cases and prevented at least 3 murders. We developed a database of behavioral patterns that helped investigators across the country identify potential Black widow killers before they could complete their deadly work. Margaret Winters might have taken my son away from me, but she'd also given me something unexpected, a purpose bigger than my own grief, a way to honor Michael's memory by protecting other families. On the first anniversary of Michael's death, I visited his grave at Mountain View Cemetery. The headstone I'd chosen was simple: "Thanks for listening." Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters. Music,